Ka Miriam Ross Aho, and I'm a senior lecturer at Victoria University of Wellington. Quick bit of housekeeping before I introduce all our guests. We did decide to go with the Zoom meeting format, which is a little bit messier than the Zoom webinar format. And the reason for it is we want a strong sense of who is or who are the VR community. And so this means that we have a slightly more interactive potential dialogue here, but it did mean a few technical hitches at the beginning. So as we go through the session, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat function. So if any questions kind of occur to you as you're listening, please put them in the chat box and I'll look at them once we get to the Q&A section. And there might also be the opportunity to actually get people to ask questions live. So we'll just see how we go through the process. But we'll aim to have a discussion for about 30 minutes and then open up for this further chat. So I'm very pleased to be joined with three guests who are all quite spectacular in the way that they combine incredible creativity with an adept use of new technologies. So to my left, I have Wuruma Grace, who has a long career in a variety of media, visual media, stage, radio, screen, and more recently virtual reality. I've then got John Strang, who from Dust Company is a kind of artistic director, but again also has this really multi-faceted work profile across museums, outdoor events, multimedia, web, and again also virtual reality. And then finally, Raki Saeed at the end, who has an amazing career across these multiple medias as well, but particularly coming through digital effects, working as a lighting artist, but also as a writer and creative and artist. And again, like the rest of us, has been working more recently in virtual reality. So I'm just going to begin by asking you to talk about a recent virtual reality project, but particularly about how it was impacted by or otherwise had to engage with a new situation that arose from COVID-19. So when we start with you, Raki.
Oh, thank you, Miriam, and thanks for that really lovely introduction. So yeah, I am working on a virtual reality narrative experience called Minimum Mass. I'm the co-director and co-writer along with Aotearoa on this project. And the project has been, we've had a 3-year development and production phase, and we were getting ready to complete it in February. Actually, we were supposed to premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival out of New York. And just as all of that stuff was going to go online and we were getting ready to leave for New York, we found out that we couldn't go to New York. We weren't going to be going anywhere. So this last few months has been an interesting process of working with festivals to understand better, like, what does exhibition mean in the virtual reality space? And so what Tribeca did is they pivoted towards a marketplace for many of the 6DOF projects because we didn't know how we were going to exhibit those. And then they partnered with Oculus, at that time Oculus TV, to deliver the 3DOF experiences, which I think went really well. That was a really great way to get a lot of people using their in-home headsets to do experiences. And then more recently, we did Can XR, which was in partnership with Tribeca. And that, I think, has been a really great experiment because they partnered with the Museum of Future Realities, which is it's an exhibition space, a virtual exhibition space, which feels like you're in a museum like Bilbao or something like that. And you're walking through the halls and then you enter a specific gallery and you get to see the experience, like different artifacts related to the experiences, digital artifacts, and then you can launch the experience itself. So we tried that with Minimum Mass, and it was really fun because it was real time. We got to be in the virtual space with people from Europe, in the European time zone, and all over the world. So I think that's what many of the festivals are experimenting with, and some of them are partnering with technology companies like Viveport and Oculus, and some of them are using Museum of Realities, which is a much more experimental and sort of art-focused exhibition platform.
Right, and I did get a chance to see Minimum Mass inside that Tribeca Cannes, and it was incredible, you know, getting to go and experience it. But it was also, yeah, it was interesting seeing what it felt like to be doing that by myself rather than going to a festival setting. So I'll ask John and Bruma now. They're going to talk about the project Whakakitenga, and I'll just do a disclaimer here because I've also worked on the project, but I'm hosting here, so I'll get you guys to talk about Whakakitenga and what happened in terms of COVID-19.
I'll let you go.
Okay, so Whakakitenga is a story that I wrote and co-directed. First time virtual reality. So the story is based on a story from my iwi Ngāti Toa, based in Wellington, so in the Wellington district. And yeah, the idea sort of stemmed from initial discussions with Victoria University about a story that illustrated colonialism or the colonial impact on us as people. And so the story sort of originated there, and then after imagining what it was like back in the early 1840s, I came up with a story that it took us quite a long time to work into the format of virtual reality. I hadn't experienced or actually worked in virtual reality before, so I had to adapt my way of thinking and imagining using VR. And so that sort of led us on this journey, and yeah, the journey was quite a interesting learning curve for me, but it opened up a lot of doors as well, and so I could see possibilities. I could also see how our stories as Indigenous people could be really connecting to the essence of our stories in ways that I think on the usual mediums of screen production don't actually allow. So being immersed and experiencing for myself how that can change the way that we connect to the story was quite a big thing. So yeah, a little bit about the process, I suppose. I'm feeling like the host now. What was it like for you, John?
Well, should we say a little bit about what happened in terms of COVID lockdown?
Yeah. So I'll go first. I was the creative director on this project, so I worked closely with Miriam and Wiramu and a few other artists, and another co-director, Paul Wolfram, who's not here today. And one of the things that we were doing, we were kind of working remotely already. So lots of last year, we spent time working remotely. I live in the Wairarapa. I come down to Wellington for work. I run a small company and hire contractors and that sort of thing. So I'm used to working remotely, I guess, which is an advantage in this scenario. And we came up to finishing the project literally the week before Māori Land, and that was then we went straight into level 3, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we were going to be screening at Māori Festival in March, and then
it was right before my birthday. That's right. I remember that. And so we went into that, and a handful of people I think showed up to watch it, but then we never really have. It hasn't been released yet, so we're stuck with this. It's in the can at the moment, as they say, waiting to get into festivals, and luckily we've gotten into Imaginative. Just recently we've heard about that, and then we're still trying to get into other spaces. But so we're sort of a step behind where Minimum Mass is at the moment, but it hasn't stopped us from continuing in this remote workspace, because we're already on another VR project, even though we've got this one sitting in the can. So it's quite an interesting place to be.
Do you want to briefly mention about the plan was to take it to your marae, to Hongiaka Marae,
Oh, yeah,
and
that's
then
right.
how that was delayed with?
Yeah. So we were sort of lined up to go to our marae and to be showing it to larger amounts of our people, and taking headsets and computers into the marae. And then when the lockdown happened, we obviously couldn't do it. It was quite a long wait, and then sort of had to re-energize the whole presenting of Whakakitenga. So we got back in contact with the marae, and then we were lucky to have a time over Matariki to show it, and we at least got about 50 people looking at it then, and it was really good response. So it was good to actually be in front of people experiencing it at the marae.
Yeah, because we think a lot about virtual reality is that you isolate yourself, put yourself in a headset, but the experience of the marae and the experience we got a touch of at Maoriland was actually, it's very special to have people actually experience this, be able to talk to one another afterwards.
Yeah.
And that has a bit of, that changes our perception a little bit about VR being a kind of isolating activity, right?
It is, I think it is, sorry, I knew about to jump in there. It is isolating. We haven't put it up on the Steam store or an online store yet because we want to see how it goes at festivals before we do that. And so, yeah, in general, I think if it is, as soon as it goes to the Steam store or Oculus store, it is very isolating. That's just how VR is, I think. But doing it in a museum space or marae or anywhere where there's lots of people is, you actually get to see the response of what you've made, which is really valuable and firsthand. Yeah.
Do you want to add to that, Rocky?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's a tension in VR exhibition between controlling the environment, which you want to do, and in controlling that environment, you get to do really nice things like onboarding and offboarding, which means that you're taking care of the participant as they move into the experience. And with a lot of these experiences, like with minimum mass, it's a very emotional landscape that we've created. And so we want to make sure that people are in the right headspace, the right physical space, safe as they enter and exit, like taking care of like what emotional space they're in when they've done the experience, and then helping them to like return to the real world after that. So like that's the beauty of the physical exhibition, is we can control those things, but then the throughput is really limited. So when you go to the festivals, like on a great day, like maybe 50 or 100 people will see your experience. And when we go to the larger platforms like Steam or something like that, then like thousands of people can come and do your experience within the span of like a few days. So we open ourselves up to wider audiences, but then we don't know the circumstances under which they're experiencing this thing that you've taken so much care to put together. So I think like that's the difficult compromise that we have to make.
Yeah, the real rewarding thing for me was seeing people in their 80s alongside young kids, 8, 9, 10, and then all in between. So just seeing the different ages and their responses, then having some chairs for them to sit down and then talk about things, and it was pretty amazing, really. And the emotions that it brings up in people.
Maybe the next platform for VR viewing is the same setup as we've got here, which you all put on the headset and we all view it at the same time, virtually, and then discuss
with less technical hitches. With that in mind, I mean, we're very lucky that we are here in Aotearoa where we're at level 1. So we've actually now been able to start doing this, curating people through headsets. But we are aware that it's a bit different around the world. Raki, do you want to say anything about the kind of experience you've had of how you've been communicating with festivals about what are the opportunities, particularly because I know that a lot of festivals are concerned with the actual process of putting people inside headsets. We're worried enough about social distancing, but getting multiple people to put on a headset in an environment of which there might be contagion. What are the conversations about that?
Yeah, I guess some of the thinking, and most of this is speculative right now because all of the festivals that we've participated in have pivoted to a fully virtual digital experience. And so there hasn't been a festival that has announced yet that they're going to be physical. Sundance has said that they want to be physical because that's in January of next year. And maybe, just for me to think about conversations I've had with people and what I imagine could happen is that we might do more immersive, physically distanced kind of things so like last year when I went to Sundance with the Minimum Mass team, we got to do what they called the bio theater. And that was a theater space, like almost as big as this room, where people were wearing headsets, but they were wearing the Quest headset, which was untethered. And they were simultaneously experiencing a thing, but there was physical space between us. Or you were sitting looking at a screen where real-time stuff was happening. So it was very experimental, but it was the idea that you could communally experience something together while being physically distanced. So I think like that's a way in which the festivals might move forward, is you have these kinds of experiences, whereas the single headset experience will be much more, single tethered headset experience will be much more friction and uncertainty around making that happen. That's maybe one way of thinking about it.
So we're obviously seeing a lot of challenges here, and that's COVID has kind of disrupted what had become quite a significant festival circuit and opportunities. But what have been opportunities when we went into lockdown? This is a new era for VR because more people will be stuck at home, more people will be inclined to buy a headset and put it on. Do we have a sense of that happening?
Personally, I think it's probably too quick to know yet, because as a lot of people were aware of, probably that the adaptation of headsets into everyone's the equivalent of having a PlayStation, I guess, because lots of VR is for gaming, and so the adoption has been slow. So I can't see within the 4 months or whatever that COVID happened, everyone just goes, oh shit, I've got a new way to live, and that's to wear a head unit. So I think we've still got a way to go yet before it's adopted properly.
I do think that the COVID situation, though, is forcing us to reckon with a thing that had to happen anyways, which was the way in which we exhibit and distribute. Like, festivals are amazing, wonderful experiences, but again, like, so few people get to go there and have the privilege of, like, I think that's a very privileged space as well, because there's so many resources that go into going there, like even having time to do it. So, and the expense of it. So I think we always needed to figure out how we were going to get more people to experience VR. And this is just forcing us to rapidly innovate and make that happen.
I think talking to funders has been something that being able to say, right, you know, COVID's happening, this is what's happening around the world, we can do this sort of work remotely, for them to get that straight away, that we don't need to be you know, working together and all that sort of thing, and for us to be able to produce content that can be used in multiple ways. You know, if we go into the whole of XR and, you know, taking VR into 360 or into dome technology or whatever, just that whole thinking of, from the funders' point of view, is that they've got to keep up, because if this is happening around the world and we are trying to push and open those doors, then they should be responding to that, you know. And so we have been having those dialogues, and because we're going on to a new project, I think that that whole talk and that whole understanding from a funder's point of view has helped to push things along a little bit. That's what I'm thinking.
And then this kind of wraps back to a question about the potential digital divide. So we know the history of various digital divides in terms of who has access to technology. So it's working in two contexts here. One is who has access to the headsets to view this content. Are we making credible content that only certain people get to see? But also who has access to either the funds or the technologies or the expertise, and that can include mentoring as well, to create this content. So I'm not sure exactly where COVID-19 might fit in with this, but how are we going to experience this potential digital divide, and what are maybe the strategies that need to happen to overcome those divides?
I mean, I think for like Miriam, you probably experienced this yourself with the teaching aspect of what we do at Victoria University, is that having to pivot very quickly to online teaching forced us to like make a certain amount of compromises, but also learn an interesting, like, how do we deliver this curriculum at scale, and how do we do it digitally, and how do we also get young and upcoming artists to have the tools to do this on their own when they're not in a space like this that has all of these resources. And so I think we've learned a lot about that, like the limitations of it, but also the potential. You know, a lot of the software companies like Adobe, Autodesk, et cetera, like created licensing scenarios in which they opened up the licensing for students who are learning from home. And I really hope that that's a thing that carries on, because that's going to have a good effect down the line with giving access to these licenses. Software itself is very expensive, and the skill to learn how to use it is part of the baseline of like authoring these experiences. So I hope that the technology companies like can kind of keep doing more of that.
Yeah. And maybe I'll go to you, Rimu, because we've had quite a few conversations about how to train up kind of a next generation. And how is you feeling about how to make sure those resources get out to different youth groups? And
I think like, because whakakitenga was the first, I think, narratively told Māori kaupapa Māori story through VR, it is opening up a door, and it's not so much the technology, but the ability for our stories to be told through different types of media. And because, you know, whakakitenga is all in te reo Māori, and for Māori audiences to understand that this is the sort of places that we can go, these are the sort of storylines that we could follow, and we can do this in a way that's not, that has come a long way in terms of being accessible for, you know, small production companies or whatever. And then what else can we do with that technology? So, you know, how can we adapt it into things like traditional practices, or, you know, places where, say, a small school in rural New Zealand can't go to different places of significance to us as Māori, but they can perhaps put on headsets, and that we can be looking at those ways, of these sort of ways, using technology to give accessibility to real Māori classes, or to small groups of Māori, or even to marae, and, you know, places of significance to them, and enhancing culture through technologies like this is probably, you know, something that our people would be really keen on seeing more of.
I do also want to add that I think tertiary education, secondary education, we have a responsibility to invest in the technology and infrastructure that enables that, right? So, like, again, this stage is amazing. It's a 20 camera motion capture volume, but it is static. It requires people who have resources on some level to come to us. And if we invested in technology like motion capture suits that have sensors built into them, then we can actually take that technology to other places and use it as a teaching tool. So I think that those are things that we have to take responsibility for in terms of investment, and how the technology can travel to places instead of people coming to the technology.
Yeah. There's something I was looking into just for this project actually, was the new Azure Connect, which is a point cloud capture system, which is sort of the third generation on from the Xbox Connect capture system. It's kind of like one of these cameras, but it can do it with 1 or 2 or 3, however you want. And it's really cheap and really affordable. So there's a lot of indie developers for VR or for games that are using that exact kind of thing that you're saying now, because they can't afford the big rigs, and they can't afford to hire a studio for X amount of $1,000 a day, or pay for the talent to do the motion capture. So they have to do it themselves in their little 7 by 7 feet office space, you know. So there's a whole lot of interesting opportunities coming up because of, I mean, for VR, but because of games. I'm finding it really interesting, and the kind of the proliferation of, if that's the right word, of motion capture for films, you know. And it's, there's so many fallout opportunities, I guess, for people starting out straight out of uni.
It's really interesting, that whole thing about audience, you know, like when we talk about TV and other different types of platforms, that audiences can be coming to get information or to experience stuff. And then we see that the shift is shifting into gaming, and shifting, our audiences are going there, whether we like it or not, you know, with all the ups and downs of what that entails. But how do we, you know, I'm always thinking, well, if they're over there, I want to be there too. I'm not a gamer. I'm not really into games, you know. VR is the first time I've seen it, but I know that this is something so powerful that if it's used in ways that we can capture our culture for myself, and then and use that technology to capture the imaginations, perhaps we can start bridging some of the divide between traditional knowledge and modern day tools, and be able to really connect, you know, because there's so much disconnect in our society between, you know, for us as Māori, this whole colonial experience for Māori has in some ways been really fantastic, in other ways really detrimental to our culture. So how do we reconnect those things using the tools of the colonial system or colonial culture to be able to reconnect ourselves. So I'm always thinking of those sort of things, you know, like with gaming or with VR or with any of the XR modalities, to be able to do that in new and exciting ways for younger people.
And that's going to segue into another question for me, but I'll just say that the reason I keep looking in this direction is because I'm keeping an eye on the chat function. We've already got a couple of questions, which is great, but I'll just do one more major question to the panelists. But if you have any questions, feel free to type them right now. I will get to them after this question. So this brings me to, we're all storytellers, and we recognize that VR has fantastic capacity in lots of industries. But if we stick to storytelling right now, we are in a small domestic market, even if headset sales continue to expand, we're still a small domestic market. So there's a kind of age-old question for storytellers in this country, which is, how do we create stories that are very meaningfully local, but knowing that in some ways the practicalities are that we have to fund our work, we have to pay the bills, so we might have to look to external audiences. So what are the tensions in the VR space in terms of meaningful local stories, but also thinking how these might go out further into the world and all those different pathways? So I'll start with Iraqi and we'll come around.
I mean, internationally recognized and locally accepted is like definitely the sweet spot for all of us. And I feel like the platforms are orienting towards us naturally or unnaturally, whatever the forces are at work. But for example, with a platform like Netflix, where they have access to all this data about who's watching and when, and what that means is they understand that there are niche audiences. And those niche audiences are actually big enough to justify certain budgets, and they're hungry for the content. And so I think like this tension between recognizing niche audiences and that there's a lot of niche audiences, as opposed to the franchise filmmaking system, which doesn't recognize niche audiences, that says we need to do something quite mainstream to appeal to everyone. Like now we have both those things. And I think like the former, the franchise stuff, is a little bit more jeopardized in the COVID world, because it's harder to create that kind of content because it requires such big crews to be present in specific locations. So, to bring together some of the themes, I think that in New Zealand, like we are in a good spot, first off, because of the way in which we can carry on and make our own content, but also that the platforms are wanting this specialized content because audiences are there and they now have the data to justify that. So like, it's not without its problems, but I think that, again, this is an opportunity for us.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I guess something I was thinking about was we're kind of lucky down this part of the world where we have some really interesting stories to tell, and there's a lot of niche stories around, and one that we've just worked on, Wiramu, is no one else has that story, that's specific to your iwi, and those sorts of indigenous stories, there's so many lessons to be learned, and the learnings can go back thousands of years, and so I think we're again in that nice little sweet spot where we've got some stories that are interesting and new to tell, and everyone has them in life. It's just if you can find them and figure out a way of telling them. So I think locally they work, and then on an international scale, hopefully they're interesting enough to get some recognition as well.
Yeah, I suppose I'm following on from that. My perspective of, and I might be just because I'm kind of new to the VR and to this whole world, what went on with COVID and the rest of it. My perspective of a lot of, because I see narrative and storytelling as being very influential in culture and in political senses and in creating change. And if we look at the narratives around the world, just with an overview of how things unfold in terms of COVID, it's easy to see similarities in how responses were made by different countries like America, Australia, and some of Europe. The the types of narratives that are happening in those places, and then the types of narratives that have been going on here for a very long time. And we're talking about, you know, the way our cultures as Māori Pākehā, as multicultural New Zealand have evolved over time. When I think about that, and when I think about my own personal experience and desire to tell stories, then I think that we have got a very important a story and narrative to be getting out there to show that there's actually a different way to see the world. And that's why I think, you know, the influence of Māori culture and Indigenous story in Aotearoa has a very profound influence on our whole society. So, and a foundation in a lot of sense that of connection to our whenua, you know, and so I believe, you know, that these stories, this Indigenous way of seeing the world, and not actually following the mainstream narrative of money and industry and products and consumerism and all the rest of it is the most important thing. And then actually, let's switch this around a bit. And I think that, you know, tools like VR can be a way of actually allowing people to see, feel, hear, experience something from a different way of seeing the world. That's me having my range.
That's great.
And I just want to add one more thing, Miriam, is that I think we can bake some of these ways of introducing local stories to international audiences into the funding process as well. So like finding the right co-production partner or finding the right funding partnerships internationally actually open up those audiences. So like with Minimum Mass, we have a co-production deal with a French production company, and the intention is that the New Zealand content then finds a place in France because we have a partner to help us do that. So yeah, I think that that's an important part as well.
So I've got some questions here, which is fantastic. Thanks to everyone that's typed them in. If you're familiar with the raise your hand button in Zoom, you're welcome to raise your hand. I'll keep an eye out for it. You can ask a live question. But if not, feel free to just type into the chat box and hopefully I'll get to as many questions as possible. So the first question is, what sort of lessons have you learned around or the context of user well-being while being immersed in your VR experience, e.g. time frame, orientation, navigation, guidance support, rather than just physical environmental considerations such as tripping hazards?
Well, with Minimum Mass, we have this interaction mechanic. So it's a combination of linear storytelling and immersive interactivity. And we had to do a lot of prototyping to figure out how to make that not nauseous for the viewer. And so that was just really time and testing. And so one of the gaming mechanic allows you to manipulate the environment. So the environment is like a floating island. You can translate it up and down. You can rotate it. Initially, we had an aspect of it where you could scale the world. And we found that while that was really kind of interesting to us as creatives, who have spent a lot of time working in 3D applications and are used to just tumbling around 3D space all the time, users didn't like that, or they thought it was interesting, but it made them feel unwell because the horizon is moving in a way that physically your body is this disconnect between the virtual and the real, which everyone talks about. And so we decided then that we were just going to remove that. And it was a decision that we made that we didn't like as creators. We wanted to keep that in there, but then we recognized that it was that needing to streamline the physical and the virtual. And I think it created in the end a more stable gaming mechanic. So I think like the prototyping and then just simplifying as you move on, because that I think is the hard part, is in the short form, how do you teach user experience and interactivity when you have so little time and also you're trying to tell a story? So like those are the challenges.
Yeah, I think I'm just thinking back to the only time that we actually moved the camera in whakakitenga was at the start, and that's the first chance that you have to be nauseous, and then it's out of the way. But thankfully we did it at a speed that everyone that's used it that I've seen use it has been okay with it.
We did have some earlier versions where we all felt a bit,
it's too fast. It's too fast. So yeah, so we sort of tried to stick to traditional cinematics. So it was a VR cinematic, I guess is what you call it, and using more traditional type ways of making the viewer look around the frame rather than moving the camera. Yeah.
I mean, it was quite interesting when we did show it at the Mirai, and we had these incredible young children that just got on the floor and were crawling around with the headsets on, and it was, you know, it wasn't kind of what we'd expected, and, you know, it was fine. We were there looking out for them, but yeah, it was on one hand wonderful that they were so engaged in the world that they wanted to touch the fire that was on the floor. They wanted to move around doorways, but again, it brings you back to, you kind of need a curated space where we were able to look out for them and check they weren't going to bang into each other, you know.
Yeah, those guardian boundaries weren't coming up or something.
Well, it was just that they were just diving, you know, they were so mobile. So yeah.
Some of the old people were sitting down. They said, "I need a seat."
Yeah.
Well, we didn't expect it. We thought, no, we made it for standing.
Yeah.
But then we realised that, for some people they needed to sit.
Yeah. And I think that is quite important accessibility conversation to have, because we get excited as creators about the mobility possibilities in VR. And what I love about minimum mass is the way you can really physically move the environment you've created around. But we do have to think about, you know, for people who do not have the same amount of mobility, how do you create a meaningful experience? So I think for us, it was quite nice at Mirai. We did find that people who chose to sit, it was absolutely fine. You know, they maybe didn't have quite the same opportunity to move around the space, but
we
put
them on swivel
chairs.
chairs.
They were on swivel chairs. Yeah, that helped. Yeah. But I just wondered if that was a consideration for minimum mass as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a consideration, and then there's limitations with budget, because we want to develop for all platforms, and we'd like to create multiple versions of it. The swivel, you know, the movement and the swivel chair is a great option, but we have to have a tethered experience because we haven't developed it for the Oculus Quest yet. So with more funding and a better understanding of the audience, I think that would definitely be something for us to work towards.
Another question here, which I have an answer to, but I'll see what you think first. Do you consider 360 degrees video, also sometimes called 3 degrees of freedom, to be virtual reality? Or do you need to offer a full 6 degrees of freedom to be a virtual VR experience? And I think most people in the audience might already know that terminology, but what we're talking about here is 360-degree video where you can look around the environment, but you can't really interact with it. Whereas 6 degrees of freedom, if you move closer to an object, you get closer to it. You can look around it, underneath it, beneath it. And often in those environments, there's a potential for more interactivity, such as picking objects up, which we don't do in Whakakitenga, but in Whakakitenga, you can still move fully around. So is 3 degrees of freedom, 360 video, is it VR?
I would say yes. Like, I don't think we gain anything by being exclusionary and making rules about what is and isn't VR. You know, like, it's a different kind of VR. And I think that the 3 degrees of freedom cinematic CVR, which some people call it, is a very powerful tool for documentary film and continues to be. And also, like, the amount of bandwidth you get with, like, the number of people that can do these experiences compared to the 6DoF, where there's a lot more friction, makes it continue to be a relevant and I think useful way of experiencing VR.
I actually was reading something today about this very thing, and it just said XR, and it was like going through all the different parts, and the first one up was 360 video, and then it didn't call it VR, but then the first sentence of VR was anything where the rest of the world disappears and you're in a complete digital environment, so therefore it qualifies.
I go with what.
But I do think it's quite an important question, because we come back again to that idea of the, you know, potential digital divides. The last thing we want is an exclusionary context where we start to gatekeep and say to some people, "Oh, you've worked on that project, but it's not really VR." Or, you know, we want it as open as possible.
Yeah, there are always these rules that pop up on Twitter, like the top 5 things that you have to be doing if you're a developer in VR. And it's just like, I don't know who that benefits. Maybe it benefits a small number of people, but all it does is it acts like a gatekeeping function of not only preventing people from actually becoming developers, but even on an aspirational level, like, oh, am I allowed to do that? That it sets up rules, which I think are not good for the longevity of the medium.
And just to add to it, what I was talking about before about our experience is a VR cinematic, but we were using techniques that are essentially like 360 video techniques, where we need an object or a character to walk around there for us to look at what's going on over here. Exactly the same technique you use in video and filming it with a 360 camera setup. So yeah, it qualifies. Yeah.
Okay, so we're unanimous. We think it counts, but I think it's also good to be aware of the distinctions and the possibilities, because I really like your point that there are certain media or certain formats such as documentary where that's actually, you want to see that live action footage which you can get with 360 video right now. So yeah, I think it's really important as creators to be aware of all the tools at your disposal and then make legitimate choices based on what tool is best for which project. Because we did talk about maybe having some 360 video in Whakakitenga right at the very beginning stages. We thought it might be nice to be out in the water and with the Wakaama scene, and then it just wasn't going to fit.
Yeah.
But,
But you can still combine the two as well.
Yeah.
Learn in 360 video and then take the next step and go, I'm going to use that as a spherical environment and put 3D objects around it, and then you kind of in the two and you've got something new. Yeah.
Okay, so another question. What are some of the ways that VR could enhance Te Ao Māori in the day-to-day? One thing I'm thinking about is capturing the oral history from the older generations for their mokopuna and generations to come.
Yep.
So I'm guessing that's to you first.
Yep, I'll just say yes to all of that. I mean, I as I said before, it's, you know, the technology is fantastic, and the development of the technology is just going to get more and more. And you know, we're at this starting point now. Who knows what it's going to be like in 10 years' time? Whether we need headsets or not to be able to play things. You know, like in the everyday right now, I can see, you know, that the 360 video style that we were talking about just before could be used really well in places of significance for our people, where we don't have to go and stand on top of a mountain. We go up there with our cameras, we do the whole thing. We can get a kaumātua who's, you know, got all of the oral history there, and we have to go to his house because he can't come to a studio. We put it all together, and you know, we've got a resource that locally, you know, it's very hard to put those sort of things together and to get children on buses and visiting different areas and getting all of that knowledge and experience into one place. So yeah, I think it is a really good technology for that.
We're coming towards the end of our time. Do any of you have one takeaway comment for, particularly going back to the initial theme of a post-COVID-19 world? What would you love to see happen in the next 12 months?
I want more people in New Zealand to do this stuff, right? Because then
We're level one.
that actually helps us, because more people help us solve our problems. And to that point, I'm going to do a plug for another Tech Week talk that we have happening tomorrow morning with Renee Pinnell, the CEO of the Kaleidoscope Fund platform, who's going to talk specifically about building international relationships between New Zealand content creators and this like really amazing, well-connected XR community, which is still pretty small by international standards. So Renee has a platform. Minimum Mass has benefited from being on that platform because we've met a lot of interesting people and got funding opportunities through it. And so I really invite everyone here in New Zealand to tune in and check that out and find out how we can start to benefit from participating in some of these platforms that already exist to create our content and share it with the world.
And you two, things you'd love to see happen in the next 12 months?
Kind of along the same vein as what Raki's saying, is a platform, whether or not it's a Steam platform or it's a sort of like a chapter in the Steam kind of online store, or if New Zealand has their own online store in some way that is accessible to all the school kids in New Zealand, or those sorts of things. Some sort of platform where we can access this stuff and a mechanism for delivering it. And I don't know, that is based upon the technology and the headsets and the affordability and those sorts of things. But it's, yeah, it'll be a little way yet. But
we'll get it done in 12 months. We'll
well, at least the thinking towards it, you know, like how might we start to get there? Yeah.
I think I'd like to, well, I think that the conversations are really a good place to start. And in terms of our funders, our, you know, the people who hold the funds to the different types of media. We've got film, we've got TV, we've got radio, we've got XR, you know, that they that they will see the opportunities and open up some of those pathways for us to be able to create content and for us to be able to train others alongside us, so that we are ensuring that we've got a good foundation of young people coming through, being able to tell their stories, for us to be able to enable them to be able to tell stories, to be alongside them, so that our storytelling base can strengthen, and our relationship with funders and overseas people doing the same thing can sort of strengthen as well. And because I really do believe is that it's the story that's the important thing, and I always say that. But the story, when we're coming from stories that originate here, then that is who we are, and the whole world can be looking to us to be leading in our storytelling, to ensuring that we're not just following the same narratives that are going on around the world, that we're creating something that's uniquely ours. So, that's where I'm always going to be sort of pushing in that sort of area. And I hope that others can see the opportunities there as well.
I think that's great. Well, thank you to everyone that has been listening in today. And what we hope is this is the beginning of future multiple conversations, because we are an exciting time. And there's a lot of potential, especially we're so privileged to be in a place right now where we're not in lockdown. So if you have any questions or want to connect in any way, it's quite easy to find my email address by looking for Miriam Ross on Victoria University Wellington's website. But again, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to my guests. Really nice speaking to you.